All right, hey there, guys. So before I move on to advanced, I do want to take a look at some more examples just to really highlight what it is that I'm trying to explain, right? So now you have a very good understanding of why we're using averages, how we're potentially using the averages, and that the averages play a little bit of a different role based on where we're looking at those averages, right? We understand that if we're looking at the momentum cycle, we're ultimately looking for that momentum in terms of the MAs, right? Where is it happening? How is price pulling back to them? Is it being bought up? And then as we drop down lower into the entry, right, what we're actually looking for is the interaction of flushes, which means it's going to look different. It's going to be the sell-offs into the averages or further down into the averages, kind of like this example here, before the buy-ups back up. So what I want to do in this specific video is make it very clear before we move on that the averages serve a different purpose based on the cycle, based on one of the two cycles we are working in, right? So as you already understand, everything we've spoken about MAs so far is a demonstration and understanding of how demand truly comes into the market on a momentum cycle. So at the moment for Anton, this is me, for the momentum cycle, which is where I'm considering momentum and what's actually happening, I'm mainly looking at the weekly and the daily. This is my V, my C and V respectively, right, of the EVC move. And on those, what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for those moves that start to prove accumulation over the MAs, the slope upwards, the pauses, the momentum MBs that begin to create those potential moves even higher. Now, for me, again, the entry cycle, which for me is a 65-minute for the most, and this operates as my E, right? The averages serve a different purpose, right? In this case, I'm not necessarily looking for price to just be above all the averages, crazy above the averages. I'm actually looking for redemanded action because we know, based on what you've already learned because of fractality, that as a weekly pulls back to the averages, the daily, or the V. So let's talk about this in the form of EVC. So as the C time frame goes through momentum cycle and pulls back to the averages, the V cycle usually is either in a momentum MB that's a little bit deeper, or and usually more likely it's flush down below MAs and is about to start a new accumulation MB for a new momentum cycle higher, right? So that is how we are using those averages to tell a story of what's going on. To show you a direct example right now of that happening, because again, I like to teach in examples. Here is a trade that I'm personally in right now. Let me move this thing over. This is, go to the weekly on Tesla. So again, going to the C timeframe on Tesla in this case, and lagging out my computer because I apparently moved way too quickly for this thing to even process what the heck I just did to it. So we're going to reload. Okay. And we're going to go to Tesla, and we're here on the weekly, right? So that's the understanding where as the weekly cycle kind of goes through this accumulation MB and then starts to pause for the momentum MB, as that happens, we know that as momentum MB is being created, what's happening on a lower time frame likely, so the V, is that prices are either coming to the 1020 or completely flushing out down, because again, the real cycles of the V are going to be in here. This is going to be a flush or a move that's not worth watching anymore. This is how we tell a story. So when we go inside of it, right, what do we see? Let me go back to the weekly actually. Let me find that area. I'll go like that so I know where it is. There it is. So it's right here, right? So what happens is, at that point, you can see prices already down here below the 10, 20, and the 5. Like, it's just below everything. There's nothing to trade here. And all of a sudden, that weekly momentum MB leads the daily, or leads the V, into making an accumulation MB, which now leads to another accumulation MB, which is now basically a momentum MB because of the rule that we've already learned and taught in the portal material. And that leads to new momentum MBs. So momentum MB1, momentum MB2, hence why I'm trading this thing right now in expectancy that we're going to make a momentum MB2 move, maybe momentum MB3 move later, and MB4, and then maybe we fail down later. So, I want to try to manage this thing and make money out of it because, again, the cycle is beautiful on this. But once again, right, the principles for what we're using the averages for change, the characteristics of them change based on what we're looking at, right? Because when we're looking at the momentum cycles, we're waiting for these conditions to kind of be met, right? As the weekly goes into that condition, so this would be the momentum, I'm just going to draw the lines. This would be a momentum MB of that weekly. Let me even do this. Momentum MB1 of a weekly, so I'll make it white. And this whole thing here was like the accumulation MB of the weekly. Right, so the accumulation MB of the weekly started to move. As it started to pull back to the rising 5, 10, and 20 on the weekly, the context time frame, that actually set a precedent for the daily, our validation time frame, to be breaking down, which means that we simply walk away from the market because there's nothing to do. And we expect that this could just chop around and fail down, but we don't care because we're waiting for money to come in a way it hasn't yet. And as it begins to, again, clarify accumulation MBs and start making momentum MBs and this pauses, the things we're looking for on the lower time frame change. We're not going to jump down to our entry cycle now to look for price to be on the rising averages necessarily, because we expect that as this is happening, price is doing what? It's likely flushing down below its given 5, 10, and 20, or just to the 5, 10, and 20, as it comes to meet the higher time frames, 5, 10, and 20. So if I go inside of that area right there, boom, remember this, on the 65-minute chart, there it is, right? What you see is price flush down. This is where the understanding of entry cycle flushes come from into accumulation MBs. It flushes down into this move and then starts the move potentially higher. And again, where does it flush to? Well, it flushes to a higher time frame, 5, 10, 20, as we've already discussed with the characteristics of accumulation MBs, momentum MBs. But now we understand that the characteristics we're looking for from the MAs we're using changes based on if we're looking for an entry and if we're looking to analyze a market to potentially seek an entry. So what you've learned thus far is that the averages serve the purposes that you've learned here in terms of the momentum cycle, in terms of where the averages are coming to, how price is selling off, if it's selling off cleanly to the averages, if it's being bought up as it sells down for the purpose of starting a potentially new move. Those are the momentum cycle things that we want to look for. But the entry cycle is different, right? On the entry cycle, we want to see the proof, right, that price is flushing to the averages. And this is also going to be made a lot more clear when we look at advanced entries, which we're going to do in the next few videos. But this is when it's flushing to the averages, usually 10/20. And I almost always want to see price at least touch the 20, but it's not necessary. And this is going to come down to a little bit of your own testing and seeing, because again, not every move is going to be the same. Not every move is going to look perfect. Not every move is a pattern-based black and white move. Instead, it's an understanding of how is money entering this market? Is this market in a clear enough condition to be potentially bought? And does this qualify as an area where I'm happy to put on risk to try to make money? So on the entry cycle, right, the averages are serving a little bit of a different purpose. And that is that we want to see price actually flush kind of to and below the averages in some cases, because we know that accumulation can now come in, right? Because we want to see accumulation come from it and then start a move higher, which is exactly what happens right here. And recently, as I go to the daily, I can show you the guys this again. Again, I don't know how this trade is going to play out. And again, I teach in a way where I show you the actual examples so that when you show up to webinars, everything makes sense in terms of what's happening. And as you get better and better and better, as we look at, so as you get better and better and better, as we look at anything, you go, okay, I understand what he's looking for. I understand the cycle. I understand why the screener is showing the current markets it's showing, and I understand how I can pick the ones I want to trade. But here, as the daily is now in its momentum cycle, and hopefully as long as it holds and doesn't fail down, because currently the selling is being met with very clear buying, we know that's going to lead to the characteristics of the averages we want to see on the entry cycle, which is the flushes to the 10-20, which become a validations time frame 5, 10, and 20, the new accumulation MBs to start a move that give us potential opportunities for an entry. So if I go to the 65-minute now and move this to the right, we have exactly that. We know from a cycle perspective that because the accumulation MB kind of came from here, we know this was likely the major flush. That major flush led to a stage 1, that led to a stage 2. That stage 1 was that validation timeframes accumulation MB validation. Now the momentum MB cycle starts, and as that happens on that validation time frame and it pulls back to 5, 10, 20, rising 5, 10, 20, it's also, for us now on the entry cycle, a flush into those points, which creates what? The accumulation MBs, momentum MBs, and delivery. That leads to new flushes, which lead to accumulation MBs, which weren't really tradable here, momentum MBs, that lead to a pull down. Now, where is this falling down to? Well, on a validation time frame, it is coming down to the 5, 10, and 20, the rising 10 and 20 being bought up at the 5. As that happens, and it's creating that momentum cycle of a V time frame within a bullish momentum C cycle, we get a flush. This is how we label our flushes and understand flushes. We get a flush. We could even consider this a flush here. So some of you are looking at this, right, and considered this an entry. That's viable. This is actually a valid trade. There's nothing wrong with taking a trade here. Some people might have even taken that. And this, for me, would have been an easy break-even trade. And again, no money lost. This is the beauty of having risk practices within your system. But nonetheless, this becomes the flush as it comes to the validation timeframes rising 5, 10, and 20. Again, the averages that we're using are holding a different principle. So the flush here starts to create the potential accumulation MBs and momentum MBs, but we're looking at them as accumulation MBs, and you get your accumulation MB1, right? Accumulation MB2, that's the double MB. Maybe it now leads to an MMB1, an MMB2, and maybe because of where this market is, those become valid points for you to take trades, right? Because these could also still be valid trades based on, for me personally, where this price is, which is still kind of inside of this leg. So again, structurally, I still think, this could be great trades because those could still hold on and you could be in those moves from those momentum cycle MBs, and they could act as opportunities to still buy stop because of that. But let's forget about that just for a second. So that created those double MBs or those entry cycle MBs, and notice how the averages, even though I'm using the same averages, play a different story in terms of what I'm looking for. And this relates directly back to the rules I taught you around understanding when something is an accumulation MB or can be labeled as a momentum MB. Because again, based on what EVCs you're looking at and based on where your entry is actually going to be or what entry time frame you're looking at, you need to understand how this major cycle that's playing out is creating these momentum cycles through the accumulation MBs, because an accumulation MB like this one will act as a momentum MB for a higher time frame, and then that creates entries on an even lower time frame. Hopefully that didn't completely go over your head, but if it did, then it's fine, because at least you have an example and you can work yourself back through the example. And this is why I use examples in my teaching, because, hey, I'm actually doing it. This is how I personally trade. This is how I'm applying these concepts. And even though it might be a little bit hard to understand, you at least get to see firsthand how these concepts are used in taking trades. And this is exactly what this is, right? And how even when you take trades and are wrong, it's not about being wrong or right. It's about understanding that, hey, when that happens, you have a style to trading that you understand that might create moves that you can make a ton of money on, or if they come back, those become trades that are worth nothing, don't even become losses in some cases, and you're good. Similarly, right now, on Monday, when this opens up and maybe starts a little move like this, I'll be moving my stop to break even, and the same thing happens if it goes through a deeper flush, but the move is still clear because of where it is. Maybe it comes down, something like this, right? Maybe to the rising 20, just at the 10, and then builds an MB, accumulation MB, and builds a beautiful accumulation MB here. I'll be trading here. Or maybe it takes off, right? Maybe an accumulation MB goes crazy, then it pauses here and it's very clean. I might take that trade. Or it flushes out here and then makes a move like this. I might take this trade, right? So again, this is that understanding of there's no black and white specific entry, but there's an understanding conceptually to how the market's moving. And when you take a trade, it doesn't mean you're there to be necessarily right or make money from it. Instead, it's for the understanding that, okay, you took this trade so you can now manage risk on it. And if it wants to go and do a crazy move again, I'll be there to make money. If I take a trade and it wants to go crazy, great. I'll be there to capitalize and make money. If I end up taking a trade and it wants to go crazy, this was from the example in the webinar, but I'll just show it here. If I can find it. Okay, I have it deleted, it seems like. Or, yeah, it looks like I have it deleted. Or it was on the left here, even further. Yeah, so if I take a trade and then I manage it, again, I might take a loss, a break even, nothing, a loss, and then all of a sudden, the simple act of managing and managing a risk, it makes you money. And in this case, this was a little bit of a crazy move. It was like a 59R just based on managing, and then you could have even held it even higher because this thing went crazy. But it's all comes from the same thing, right? That's really important to remember. So the thing I want you to understand from this specific portal piece is that you already have a lot of these examples, but right, there's a different purpose that the averages are acting as when you're looking at the C, the V, and the E, right? The C and the V are looking at a specific story being told around money being demanded. And then the E tells that story as well, but it tells it differently, right? Because for us, the story that's being told is that the fact the price is losing the averages here means that the next step in this flush based on the EVC is to create accumulation to actually start that continuation in the move. that's going to line up with that higher time frames momentum MB and continued delivery, right? Just like we saw in these examples way back there on DJI when we looked at this in the last video, right? I don't know where we went, like 1985 or something. I forget. It was somewhere here, 1985, 1986. So yeah, we were in this move right here, I believe. Yeah, this move right here is the one we looked at, right? This is where we understand that as this starts to come out, we know the daily just went through a lot of chop, but as this comes out and goes sideways, we know the daily is now starting to accumulate. And as we go into the daily, we start seeing that bullishness on the daily, hence the move we saw here where the daily started to go from chop into accumulation MBs, which started to create momentum cycle MBs, momentum MBs, and those momentum MBs led to what? Entry-based timeframe orders coming in. Momentum MBs led to entry-based timeframes. Momentum MBs led to entry-based timeframes. Momentum MBs, entry-based timeframes. Momentum MBs, entry-based timeframes. Extension, fail down, restart. The same thing on repeat, the same cycles, over and over and over again, right? Using the averages. And the averages play a different role based on the time frame we're specifically looking at across the EVC because they show us demand coming into the market in a different way. Right? Because this is already showing us right here, for instance, when price pulls back here to the rising 5 and it's on the 5 and it's being bought up and it's doing so with poor selling. So again, the selling is coming in, but it's poor selling, and the buying is absorbing all the selling, in this case at the 5, which means that the rising 10 and 20 might catch up, but that is, you know, the showcase that the momentum cycle is happening. We know that what should be the case is that this selling should lead to a 65-minute, which is our entry cycle time frame. It should lead to a flush out that comes to maybe a 10/20 of its own time frame, and that is the key or the signal that new demand might want to step in. And then if demand steps in, those are the accumulation MBs, those produce those potential opportunities. Or if there's no accumulation MBs and it moves higher, it might produce that momentum MB that acts as an accumulation MB that you can now take as an opportunity higher because you have a reason to watch the market you're watching. Like, for instance, the screener reading. Okay, that might have been a lot. Maybe we'll do another example to explain this. But the main thing we need to understand is that the averages and their usage comes down to understanding where we are cyclically in any given cycle, and the effect that they play on the V and the C in terms of us looking at something, and then on the E have little distinct and different qualities to what makes that move worth considering. That's ultimately what this piece of portal content was to make sure you understand. Okay. And hopefully I'm getting a call right now on my phone, but hopefully this exact example here and the one that you saw on the Tesla trade I took, and you can go back and look at even like the MSTR trade I showed. Hey, one sec, I just got to mute. Okay. Just like you saw in the MSTR trade that we've went over, the Tesla trade that I just took, and this DJI thing back in 1985, there's an understanding of how these timeframes are going to work together to show the cycles and to demonstrate the cycle that you're in and to demonstrate that demand is coming in as well. Okay, beautiful. We'll look at some more examples in a second.